Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Michael Brodkorb.
And I'm Becky Scherr.
Yesterday, Becky and I recorded an interview with Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon. The interview was set up earlier this month. One day before we recorded our interview, a lawsuit was filed with the Minnesota Supreme Court to bar former President Donald Trump from the 2024 ballot, arguing, according to the suit, that he is disqualified from being president again for violating Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, also known as the Insurrectionist Disqualification Clause, for his role in inciting and facilitating the violent insurrection at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Enacted in the wake of the Civil War, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment disqualifies from public office any individual who has taken an oath to uphold the U.S. Constitution, but then engages in insurrection or rebellion against the United States or gives aid or comfort to its enemies. The lawsuit was filed by Free Speech for People on behalf of several Minnesota voters, including former DFL Secretary of State Joan Grow, former Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson, and former Republican activist Dave Thule. Our complete interview with Secretary Simon will be released next Tuesday, but due to the timing of his interview, we wanted to share Secretary Simon's thoughtful and newsworthy response to our questions about the lawsuit and the role his office has in determining who is or isn't on the ballot in Minnesota. We hope you appreciate this preview of our interview with Secretary Simon. Secretary Simon, I want to kick things off today by asking you a question about a lawsuit that was filed yesterday with the Minnesota Supreme Court that hopes to bar President Donald Trump from appearing on the presidential ballot in 2024 in Minnesota. What role does your office have in the suit? And what role does your office have in determining who is or isn't on a ballot in Minnesota?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Very timely. So for your listeners' sake, yeah, we got sued yesterday. We're the second state in the country. Colorado was the first. We're the second. And look, this is the way the process is supposed to work, because in the run-up to this lawsuit, there had been a lot of buzz nationally and in Minnesota about this legal theory. And the legal theory is that former President Trump is disqualified from even running for the office, let alone serving in the office based on the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. But putting that idea on the shelf for a minute, what I said in the run-up to yesterday's lawsuit and what I'm doubling down on now is we have a process in Minnesota for settling eligibility contests or eligibility challenges. In our office, the Office of Secretary of State, we are not the eligibility police. That's not what we do. And whether it's a constitutional challenge, whether it's a residency challenge or an age challenge or any other kind of challenge, it's not proper legally for the Office of Secretary of State to make that call. And we haven't, and we don't, and we won't. Now, we will always do what a court tells us to. So if as a result of this lawsuit or any other lawsuit, a court determines that a candidate is ineligible for office for any reason, of course we will abide by that result. But it is not our place. It is improper for our office to be making those determinations. So, Michael, to your question, now what? We are named as a defendant in this lawsuit because technically what they're seeking is an order preventing us from placing a candidate on the ballot. That's why we're the defendant. But we will be taking no position on the underlying legal merits, whether former President Trump is disqualified or not disqualified. That ultimate legal question is for the courts, and we will not take part in the determination. We'll take part in the lawsuit to the extent we're a named defendant and we need to be there, but we will not be taking a position on the merits underlying the lawsuit.
So now, is this kind of the first step in that process of going through the court systems? I know former Secretary of State is on there. Former Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson is a signer of there, as well as other Republicans and Democrats alike. So is this how they get the ball rolling to get it through the court system and ultimately possibly up to the Supreme Court?
Yes, exactly. This is exactly the process in Minnesota law. This is what we were saying for the last few weeks is, don't look to us, look to the courts. We have this tool in the law, and this is that tool. And it's a little unusual compared to other states. It's a lot more efficient in one sense. This goes directly to the Minnesota Supreme Court. There's no district court, court of appeals, all of that stuff. This is a straight shot right to 7 people who serve on the Minnesota Supreme Court. So they ultimately will decide this. But Becky, to your point, I think embedded in your question was a really good insight. In my opinion, anyway, this is going to end up in the laps of the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't think there's any chance that you will have some cluster of states who somehow determine that former President Trump is ineligible, and it will just be limited to a cluster. Either former President Trump will be on the ballot everywhere or nowhere. I think the U.S. Supreme Court will make sure that whatever the outcome is, it will be uniform throughout the country. So whether the case arrives in their laps by way of Minnesota or the Colorado lawsuit, or maybe other lawsuits that are to follow, I don't know. But ultimately, I think it's going to be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court.
We hope you appreciated this preview of our interview with Secretary Simon. Again, our complete interview with him will be released next week. Please visit our website at @BBBreakPod to subscribe to our podcast and listen to all of our episodes. Thank you so much.